Well, now we face a new kind of threat in the Middle East, centering on the Iranian regime and its possession or soon-to-be possession of nuclear weapons. Is this a problem that, for which regime change is the answer, or does this require a more straightforward military response to counter this threat?
Well, first of all, regime change is uncertain. It's uncertain whether you could affect it or not. Secondly, it's also uncertain whether regime change would do the trick, since having the nuclear capacity, although fuzzy in the minds perhaps of most Iranians, is very popular. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of national prestige and self-defense.
And it's a matter of Shia prestige too, isn't it? Within the Middle East?
It gives them a great deal. I mean, to begin with, it protects them from potential U.S. intervention. They are surrounded by nuclear states or forces. Pakistan to the east, Russia to the north, the United States in the Gulf, mm-hmm. Israel to the west, and Iraq was at one point trying to get nuclear weapons, so that Iran said quite logically, rationally, well, we need them too. Mm-hmm. And if they had them, they could absolutely rule out American military intervention in Iran, which is almost impossible anyway, because they have 75 million people and the terrain is such that we just couldn't do it. And they should know that, but they don't necessarily know mm-hmm. that. Also, they can then lead the Islamic world if they had nuclear weapons. They might wipe out Israel with a lucky shot. In fact, Rafsanjani said one shot is all we need, mm-hmm. and he's the moderate. And they could separate.
What do you know about the reliability of the Iron Dome anti-missile system? Is that a serious obstacle?
Sure, but you can't take a chance. I mean, if it didn't work, mm-hmm. then that's the end. Right. That bears upon our anti-missile efforts, which perhaps we can discuss later. But getting back to they could separate Europe from American interests in the Middle East by threatening Europe, and they could even threaten us because, as I've written in the CRB, they have the capacity actually to deliver a nuclear weapon upon the United States should they have one. And inexpert experts say that they don't, but they do, because they can sea launch. Mm-hmm. And the United States and Russia have both had...
That means from a ship off the coast of the United States, a merchant freighter or something?
That's right. There are two ways you can do it. The United States and Russia have programs in which we would drop a missile into the water, and the water would serve as the gantry to stabilize it, and it would launch. Mm-hmm. And we've launched 80 missiles that way. Only in the Reagan administration did that program come to an end. The Russians had two programs like that. The second way is launching actually from a platform. Mm-hmm. And the Iranians have done that in the Caspian Sea. They've launched from the sea. Mm-hmm. They can do that. They could have a fighter plane under the belly.
And so if you do that, then you only need a short range or intermediate range missile.
That's correct. Yeah. A short range missile. Yeah. They can have a fighter plane carry a bomb underneath the belly of a tanker, which would be disguised as a civilian aircraft. And we have virtually no air defense. Mm-hmm. So, and even if we had, we might not know, because they could fool us and then make a dash. And then, of course, there's smuggling. I have seen nuclear weapons that weigh 120 pounds be carried in a backpack. If they have one that weighs 500 pounds, they could carry it in a salesman's case. I mean, mm-hmm. thousands of tons of drugs are smuggled into the United States. Certainly a nuclear weapon could be. So they have many reasons to want a nuclear weapon. They have many, and they probably will get them. They are rational in that respect. It serves their interests. If I were an Iranian, I would want a nuclear weapon. But where they are not rational is in their likelihood of using it. In other words, their threshold mm-hmm. is different from ours. Ours is different from the Soviet Union, from the Russia's and what was the Soviet Union's, and from China's, and from any. People don't understand that there are different thresholds for nuclear use.
What's the variable then? the nature of the regime, the nature of the people, the culture. What are you talking about?
The culture and the experience. Mm-hmm. For instance, in the Soviet Union, they saw nuclear weapons as a kind of artillery, and their doctrine was extremely loose compared to ours in terms of the use of nuclear weapons. Even we, who are having used them, the only power that's ever used them, are very restrained and responsible. I mean, over half a century with scores of thousands of warheads, we never used them. But we did use them in Japan. In the Korean War, not only MacArthur, but Churchill and Eisenhower discussed at the Bermuda Conference, put on the table nuclear use north of the Yalu against China. So if we could do that, imagine what the Iranians can do, given their apocalyptic culture.
What do we do about the problem of their nuclear capacity? And is this a problem that we have to do something about, or is this a problem that Israel, our ally, can be trusted or can be handed to discharge itself?
It would be very, very difficult, but possible for Israel to do it. Certainly possible. Risky. Mm-hmm. Far less risky for us to do it, given the state of the Iranian Air Force, and given our possibility of, especially if, by the way, if the Saudis were to help us, they have a hell of an Air Force for suppressing lesser targets and lesser anti-aircraft. My estimate is, and I'd say maybe a week to 10 days maximum, and we could suppress all our air defenses, and then we would have complete control of the air, and then could bomb the facilities.
It would be going to war. It would be a decision to go to war, of course. I mean,
yes.
That is as much a sticking point as the military improbables.
Yeah. Well, put it this way. When people talk about that, and you see this all the time, they don't make the distinction between boots on the ground. Of course, there'd be a few boots on the ground because you'd have to have special forces for targeting and possibly even penetration of certain areas. But there'd be virtually no boots on the ground. It's not a ground war. It could never be, should never be, would never be a ground war. It would be an air attack. Now, we've done this in the past, such as against Gaddafi, in what Reagan did. We did it to some extent in Kosovo. There can be, given that we have a limited objective, which is just to destroy the nuclear facilities, then you can have a limited war.
Well, what about this scenario, though? I mean, the Israelis have much more difficult military odds facing them than we do, as you say. But they're also a nuclear power. And one wonders if this is an existential threat to them, whether they would not be prepared to use the existential weapon and use their nuclear arsenal to take out the incipient Iranian nuclear arsenal.
Well, it is an existential threat. In extremis, they would, but we haven't reached that point yet because the Iranian capacity is still vulnerable to a conventional attack. Mm-hmm. So I think the last people on Earth who would use nuclear weapons without giving everything a chance, probably the Israelis, because that would be almost the end for them.
Yes.
I mean, the world is against them enough as it is. Being the first to use nuclear weapons, even if they didn't kill too many people, because these facilities are generally isolated, it would still be in people's minds such a momentous thing that I don't think that Israel will use nukes. They have a way to go before they would be pressed to do something like that.
But you would concede it's not unimaginable if nothing happens and the threat builds?
If nothing happens and the threat builds, it's possible. However, once you cross a certain threshold and you have a nuclear weapon, then nuclear weapons are no use against it. I mean, for deterrent possibility for uses, yes. But you take that weapon, you put it in a truck, you take it someplace. You can't target a nuclear weapon with other nuclear weapons necessarily.
Right.
Everything changes with the fait accompli of Iran possessing a nuclear weapon. Everything changes suddenly. It's too late at that point. And we're approaching that point now.
With what assurance could we strike against Iran? Would an attack be effective enough for our purposes?
If we did it, there would be consequences. Some of us would die because they would make their attacks upon us. But they're never going to be madder at us than they are right now. They chant death to America when their parliament meets. They are apocalyptic. They detest us. They're a culture of martyrdom. You cannot let them get nuclear weapons. So the answer to that question, I would say, yes, we should strike them. If we don't, Israel will. And as to what might happen, well, it's dangerous. It's dangerous, but letting it go is more dangerous. And by the way, as to the Iranian claim that it's for peaceful purposes, I don't think there aren't too many people outside the White House who believe that these days. But they have enough natural gas, having the world's second largest reserves, to last them for 270 years, generating electricity. And they export electricity now, and they've been planning on running high-tension lines to Russia to export more. They don't need nuclear power except for prestige and weaponry.
And so, would you venture a prediction?
If the President Obama were to do it, then he would almost guarantee his re-election. That would be the second Nixon goes to China. He would agitate his base, who would stay home a lot, but the middle would probably vote for him unless there were really severe blowback, in which case maybe he wouldn't be. But if I put it this way, if I were he, that's what I would do. I'd take that chance.